Zok the Heilige Gemara. Amar Bavo Amar Bechanan. Kol Isurin Shabbatayra Ein Heter Mitzdarf LeIsser. Heter is not Mitzdarf to Isser. As a matter of fact, Heter is Mevatel to Isser. Chutz, except for Isuri Nazir. By Nazir, the Isser is Mitzdarf LeHeter. We had a pasuk that tells us Miyayin v'shecher Yazir Chaymet Yain Chaymet Shecher Lo Yishta V'chol Mishras Anovim Lo Yishta. Anything that's soaked in wine you shouldn't drink. And if you remember in the very Mishnah, Rabbi Kiva told us Afilu Shara Pitoi B'Yayin, even if you soaked bread in wine, the yeshba, the bread combined with the wine, so you see here that a heter, the bread, there's no isser for a nazir to eat bread. Yet when it's soaked in the wine, the heter is mitzaref l'isser. This is a phenomena that we don't find anywhere other than nazir, shari amr Torah, mishras, because the Torah said mishras. Zok to Gemara. So this concept of heter mitzaref l'isser is a little bit similar to an unrelated concept of tam ke'ikr, meaning if there's tam of an isser mixed into heter, it also ushers it, even though it's not there. The Rishonim speak out, there are two unrelated things, but there are two strong principles regarding the isser of heter. The Noam Elimelech in Parshas Nosai, Abraham Melech says that the same way you find in physical things these type of halachas, it also applies spiritually. So the Noam Elimelech says, Tam Ki'ikr is sometimes a person has a hir hara to do an aveira, but he doesn't do the aveira. Or he looks at something that is inappropriate, that also makes him think of aveiras. That's called Tam Ki'ikr. That's just as bad as the veir itself. He also says by heter mitzaref l'isser, the Noam compares to you can do something heter l'moshel. People are in business, people are working with parnasa, and sometimes, let's say you're working for a company and you can use some of their resources for your own personal things. Big deal. You might heter, it's a small little thing. There it's heter mitzaref l'isser. Even the heter dikazacha that you do will also be ruined because of the small violations that you might do otherwise. So basically, what Tanoim Elimelech is saying, the same way we look at kashrus of food and how careful we have to be, that's how we have to apply to all areas of our life. Easier said than done. Not for Zogan anyway. Zok to Gemara, Zeiri Amar, Zeiri says, not only does it apply to Naziris, it actually applies elsewhere. Af Sahar. There's a halacha. The Torah says you're not allowed. We say it every day in Karbanis and in Kalakenu that you're not allowed to be makter the Torah Sahar on the Mizbeach, the Baal Taktiru. So there as well, heter mitzaref l'isser. So let's see the pasuk that Zeiri is referring to. It says as follows: Kol amincha asher takribu l'Hashem lo yisasach chametz. You're not allowed to serve minchas chametz. Kichol zahor v'chol dvash lo yisaktiru mimenu ichal Hashem. We do know that there's an exception to this rule. Once a year, we actually are makriv chametz on the mizbeach. I don't know if we're makriv on the mizbeach, but it's definitely part of a carbon. And that is on Shavuos. The shtei alechem is chametz. By Kabbalah Satorah. There's also a time where we bring dvash to the Beis Hamikdash. And where's that? That's by Bikurim. Because the Bikurim are from the Shivas Aminim, and one of them is dates, which is where we get our dvash from, the dvash at least of the Shivas Aminim. So I think the Minchas Chinuch says that it might be, I think it's in the Chinuch, or maybe it could be one of the later Balei Musar. They say, what's up is these two things. The Teretz is the Torah is trying to teach us that we need Sa'ar. Sa'ar really represents the Yitzhahara, blown up, right? Fluff that's not really real. We need that. However, it has to be we have to engage in gashmis. We need gashmis, but it has to be in a controlled way and in limited quantities. Therefore, when is it given? It's given by Shavuos, which is the Yom Tov of Kabbalah Torah. When it's tempered with the Torah and controlled with the Torah, yes, sometimes one has to indulge. And the same thing with honey. Honey is very good, but in large quantities, it's very dangerous. When is Bikurim? Are we allowed to have honey by Bikurim while we're focusing primarily on the goodness that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives us? Those are the only times those are safe, when they're very controlled by the Torah and by us showing appreciation for the Rebbeinu Shalom. So it says as follows: Kaman Kreb Eliezer, who is Zeiri holding like when he says that Sa'ar cannot be put on the Mizbeach, and there's even a concept of Heter Mitzaref L'Isser. Zok the Gemara, it's like Rebbe Eliezer, the Dorish Koil, because it says Ki Chol Sa'ar. The word Kol says that not only the Sa'ar, the pasuk says Ki Sa'ar v'dvash lo yisaktiru. It says Kol Sa'ar. Kol Sa'ar tells you that if it was mixed in, if you had chametz mixed in with matzah, that would also be awesome. Kaman Rebbe Eliezer the Dorish Koil. Frek the Gemara, Ihachi le'inyin chametz nami. By the pasuk of chametz, it says Kol machmetas lo yisaychelu. So if you're going to hold that there's a concept of heter mitzaref le'isser by being makriv sa'ar on the mizbeach, well, then by extension you should also say that when it comes to eating chametz as well, heter should be mitzaref le'isser. Zok Gemara ein chanami. In fact, Zeiri would in fact hold like that. Elo lafuke me Abaye. All Zeiri was trying to say is that he does not hold like Abaye. The Omar Yesh Haktorah the Pachos Mikazayis. Abaye holds that it's considered a Haktorah less than a Kazayis. So there, you don't need any tziruf whatsoever. Any amount of chomet that you'll put on is an Isser in and of itself. Kamash Malon ein Haktorah b'Pachos Mikazayis, but you still have the fact that heter is mitzaref le'isser. Let's have a look in the Rab. Ein heter mitzaref le'isser im achal chatzi kazayis basar, the chatzi zayis chelev einoi chay. There you wouldn't be chay because you didn't have your full kazayis of chelev. Chutz min nazir shari amr Torah v'chol mishras anovim lo yishta kloimer shimshara pitei b'yayin. If you soaked your bread in wine, v'yesh by mi pas umiyayin. And there's not enough wine to make an isser, but together with the bread there will be a kazayis chayiv. Then you'll be chayiv. Hachi dashin and b'samach. That's how we dashin later. The ika kazayis miyayin l'chudei k'ralamali. If absorbed into the bread there was already a kazayis of wine, why do I need a pasuk of mishras? I'm drinking a full kazayis of wine. It must be because we're including the mass of the bread in the Isser. When we assert the Mishras, hachi by Naziris, we're not learning it from Koil, we're learning it from the word Mishras. So it's not totally in what we're discussing now. Let's skip to Ziri Amr Afsaor, Beval Taktiru. Shem hikter chatzi gezayis misar, the chatzi zayis mimatza mitzarf. It'll be mitzarf. Mishum kol saor lois aktiv. Now the next Tosfos quotes a Rashi, not here in Psachim, that he disagrees with. So it's really a dispute in Psachim. So I just want to skip half of the Tosfos and I want to focus on Tosfos' mahalach in the sugya. So we have kol machmetas loisechelu, and it says ki chol zahor v'chol davash loisaktiru. So by chomet it says kol machmetas loisechelu, and by sa'ar it says ki chol zahor v'chol davash. Our Gemara here seems to say that Zeiri will have to agree that if heter is mitzaref le'isser by Sa'ar, when you're makrib it on the Mizbeach, Huadin, he'll have to have that shita when it comes to Chametz. So let's have a look at Tosfos' shot at the end. Lakach Nira, I'm just about halfway down in the Tosfos, the uber wide lines. There's the Iri Mefarish Abraisha, the Perak Menachos, could appear Shuraba Hasan. So there's a Braisa in Menachos that says as follows: Ainli Elakuloi. I would have only thought that if the entire koimitz is chometz, there's an isser to be makter. Pirish kol ha-koimitz, dainu shnei zeisim. So Tosfos is telling us that how much content is there in a koimitz when the kohen makes kmitza of a mincha to put it on the mizbeach. There's two zeisim there. And I would have thought that the isser that the Torah says not to be makter a koimitz on the mizbeach, that's if all two of the zeisim, if the koimitz are going to be chometz. Because sover ein kometz pachos mishnei zeisim. Miktsasa minayin. How do you know if even part of the koimitz was chometz that it's also a lav? Pirish chatzi a koimitz shehu kazayis. So you still need a kazayis. But how do you know that if it was only half of the koimitz, that it would still be considered an isser lav to be makter on the mizbech? Talmud loimer kol. So it says kol saor v'chol devash loy shaktiru. That tells you even if you have a half a koimitz, but it's still a full shir kazayis, there would be a lav. Then the Brisa goes one step further and says a ruva minayin. What does that mean? Dahainu chatzi zayis to saor v'chatzi zayis to matzah. What if you don't even have a full kazayis of chometz, but it's mixed together, chometz with matzah in that zayis? There you already need the concept of heter mitzdaref le'iser to create, to trigger a lav. Dainu heter mitzdaref le'iser tamadomer kichoil. So there's two ribuyim in the parsha that talks about being maktar koimitz and mizbeach. There's the kol soor b'chol devash. There's the kichoil soor. So the extra key tells you that even if there's less than a kazayis of chametz in the mix, but it's mixed with more of heter, you say heter mitzdaref le'iser. So based on that, Zok Tosfos, let's apply that to our Gemara. The Hashta Osli Shapir, the Omar Keman Karabalonzer. Our Gemara here suggests when Zeiri said that by Sa'or Heter's Mitzarf Le'Isr, it's consistent with Rabbi Lozer, the Dorish Koil, who darshins the word Koil. You're going to look into the Bach. The Dorish Koil, the Kivan, the Chol, Osa, Lachatzi Akoimates. Since kol is telling you that half the koimitz, right? Just a moment ago, we learned that the word kol is telling you that a koimitz is two kazaysim. And kol tells you, even if one of those two kazaysim are chometz, it'll be a problem, right? So the kivan, the chol, also lachati a koimitz, ayaser lei, he has extra kichol, he can use the key, which is an extra limit over and above that, to discuss when you don't even have a kazayis. Rather, it's mixed together with matzah. Tainu heter mitzdaref le'iser kidaprecious. So that's why the Gemara is suggesting that the area holds like Rabbi Eliezer. Avol Rabbanon. But if you would learn like the Rabbanon over there in Psachim, the Loidarshi call. He ignores kol. He holds kol is not a limit at all. Rak kichol. He only darshans from the fact that it says kichol, and he applies that to tell us the lesser of the two chedushim, that even if only one of the two kazesim was chometz, tanu lachatzi akoimetz shehu zayis sholin, it's a complete zayis. That's when he will use the kichol. Aval eruvoy the hainu heter mitzdaref le'iser, but the extra concept that heter mitzaref le'iser, if you only had a half a kazayis of chometz and you have to be mitzarefet with a half a kazayis of matzah, lo shma'in and klal, you wouldn't know it at all. So that's what the Gemara here means. Command Rabbi Eliezer to Dorish Koil, because if you're going to use Koil to tell you that heter mitzaref le'iser, it must be like Rabbi Eliezer, because according to the Chachamim, you don't have the Koil to say heter mitzaref le'iser. But once you hold like Rabbi Eliezer that kol is a limud, well then in chametz nami you should also say that the kol machmetas tells you that heter mitzaref l'isur. In fact, that is what Zeiri would hold. So even though Zeiri said it applies as well to Val Taktiru, it also applies as well to the halacha of Chametz Pesach. Well, let me just finish my sentence. But what does Zeiri mean to tell us? Lafuki me Abaye domer yesh haktor b'pachas mekazayis. Of a Zoivite, he holds haktor is not b'pachas mekazayis. So you need the concept of heter mitzaref l'isur in order to be able to have this isur. Kamashlan in haktor b'pachas mekazayis. And I just want to fear us in the Tosus, in a Chanami, Ella, La Fuke, Me Abaye, Hachikamar, the Sar, Adifa, Lashminon, the Loik Abaye. Why did Zeiri say this halacha by Haktarish Mizbech? Why didn't Zeiri tell us a halacha that's more relevant to us? That by Chametz, Heter Mitzaref l'isur. The territory Zeiri wanted to take a shot at Abaye on the side. The Hakamashmanon, Ein Haktara, the Iketzirif in, the Eloi Loi. Without sirif, you won't have an isur, because according to Abaye, you don't need sirif to have an isur, because there's an isur to be makdir on the mizbech less than the kazayis. Remember, kazayis, the whole shir of kazayis is achila. Haktar on the mizbech, mehekatesi kazayis is even relevant. Abaye holds a kazayis isn't relevant to that. So all Zeiri wanted to express as an aside is that you have heter mitzaref l'isur by being makdir chametz on the mizbech, which means you do need a shear, but the heter is mitzaref l'isur. Okay, what's the point?
Why
Because it's more extra. Kol is one word, kichal is two words. I can't answer that question. I'm going to accept it. I'm going to accept it from Rebbe Eliezer, who darshans kichal. I can't fight with him on why he considers it extra. He considers it extra. What should I do? Well, because the Torah could have just said, Sa'or udvash lo shektim and Yishul Hashem. It doesn't need ki, it doesn't need kol. If it was only coming to Asher, Sa'or and Davash, the Torah should have said, Sa'or udvash lo shektim. And there would have been, everything would have been crystal clear. Okay. Let's see the Gemara weiter. Yosef Rav Dimi, the Ka'amar law, lahashmaitze. Rav Dimi was saying over this halacha. Which halacha? I believe it was the halacha of Zeiri. He was saying over the halacha of Zeiri. Lahashmaitze, the Rabbavo, the Bishari Surim ein heter mitzaref l'isur. My apologies. It was Rabbavo's halacha that we learned on Amud Beis, that even though by Shari Surim ein heter mitzaref l'isur, by Nazir it is mitzaref. So the halacha that we're focused on is that by Shari Surim, ein heter mitzaref l'isur. On that, Eisvei Abaye. Abaye asked the kasha. Hamikveh shel truma. You have like a thick porridge of truma. V'hashum v'ashemen shel chulin. And in this porridge, there was oil and spices of chulin. V'nagat full yoim b'miktsasa. And a full yoim who is tameh, at least to be matama truma, but not to be matama chulin, he touched part of this mikveh. So the halach is pasal eskulan. The entire mikveh is going to be tameh. It's not a mikveh that you tovel in, it's a mikveh that you eat. And it's not feh, it's very good. It's a makveh? Okay, maybe I'm not pronouncing it right. What is the article says? Is it makveh or mikveh? Mikpah. It's a mikpah. Okay. So Toshus tells us what is a mikpah? Tafshel avakafui. It's a thick, sort of gelled type of. It's like a stew type of consistency. Kain daisa like a porridge. But Vashem shenasin boy tavlin have a chulin, and the spices in it are chulin. Shenagat tfulyoyim b'miktas pasal eskulai. Why? The ikr of this whole dish is not the tavlin; it's the actual dish itself. And the hishal truma, utful yoim poishal as a truma, and at full yoim pasals truma. Correct. It's connected. Okay. Now, what about the opposite? What if it was the following case? Mikvah shel chulin. So the whole porridge was chulin, but there was shum and shemen there of truma. And there's a machloikis here between Rashi and Tosfos. Was the shum and shemen ground up and not visible, or was it actually visible and were there pieces? So I'm going to approach this, and it's totally in a huge machloikis, Rashi and Tosfos all over Shas, by Tumas Oichlin. The halach is Tumas Oichlin, something that is tamei cannot be metama something else. So if I have a food that's rishon l'tuma, it cannot be metama another food unless it's the size of a kabeya. But contract tuma, there's a machloikis if it needs any shear to be able to contract tuma to become tama itself. Rashi holds that it will become tame. Rashi holds it will become tame even if it's a minuscule size. It doesn't have to be the size of kabeya to contract tuma. While Tosfos says that shear of kabeya works two ways. Food cannot transmit tuma if it's less than a kabeya, and it cannot contract tuma if it's less than a kabeya. So I'm going to work with Tosfos' chart just so that it shouldn't be confusing of going back and forth. And we're going to assume that the shum and the shemen are not ground and dissolved in the porridge. They're distinct and visible. So mikvah shel chulin v'ashum v'ashemen shel truma. It was contained. We're not really focused on the shemen. We're going to be focused probably on the shum. V'nagot full yoim b'miktasan. And here at full yoim touched part of the porridge, the chulin portion. There we say le'pasal elamokam magoy. The only part that becomes posel is the part that he touched. Ba'avinamba, and the Gemara asked the kasha on this case, mokai magoy amai posel. Why is the mokai magoy posel? Why is even the area that he touched posel? And Tosfos has to leg too. It's less than a kabeya. It's less than a kabeya. So even if he touched a piece of shum, the porridge is chulin. It for sure won't become tough. But we're assuming he touched a piece of shum, some of the truma. Even if he touched the truma itself, it's not big pieces, it's small pieces. It's less than a kabeya, and if it's less than a kabeya, then it shouldn't become tamei at all. That was the approach of Tosfos. It's a long Tosfos, and I want to keep it simple. So that was the Gemara's kasha over there. And what did the Gemara answer? Matam. Would you like to know why it passes that mokim? Hoyel v'zor loike alei b'kazayis. If a zor eats a kazayis of this mix, the zor is going to get malchus. Why would the zor get malchus if he eats a kazayis of this mix? A kazayis of this mix does not include a kazayis of truma. It only includes part of its content as truma, but not all of its content is truma. So my time, why would a zor get malchus for eating a kazayis of this mix? Lav mishum the heter mitzaref le'iser. Is it not because the heter, the chulin in this pot now also becomes part of the heter? So even though your kazayis consists partially of truma and partially of chulin, we give you malchus because we look at it like you ate all of truma. Oh my lay, so you have a raya from here against Rabavo. You Rabavo said but from this brisa that we said it passes welcome agoy, you have a chlor raya that in fact is mitzaref iser, and that's why it'll become tamei because we consider the whole thing like truma. Zok Gemara loy. My kazayis. Why do we say welcome agoy is tamei? Because if you ate a kazayis, you're going to get malchus. If a Yisrael eats a kazayis, you're going to get malchus. It's because the kazayis b'chtei achilas pras. If you only eat a kazayis of this mix, you will in fact not get malchus, because in fact ein heter mitzaref leiser. But in the period of time called achilas pras, which is anywhere from 3 to 9 minutes, now as we're getting closer to Pesach, we know that you have to eat your matzah in the shear of achilas pras, the amount of time that you eat a certain amount of eggs. I mean, it's not a clear-cut shear. There's big shilas about it, but it's basically between 3 and 9 minutes. So for Isser, we say it's 9 minutes, and for Heter, we say, and for Mitzvahs, we say it's 3 minutes. So the matzah you're going to want to eat within 3 minutes, but if you're eating on Yom Kippur, you don't want to even eat within 9 minutes, a certain amount of shear. So since in that period of time, if you're eating this Michael, you'll end up eating a full kazayis. That's why it's combined. That's why it's also. But of course, the heter is not mitzaref l'isser. So there's enough of a concentration of truma in this porridge that if you're eating for 3 minutes, you're going to end up ingesting a kazayis of truma. Frek the Gemara, v'achilas pras da'iraisehi. Are you going to say that achilas pras is da'iraisa? Because this whole tumah is only a dirabanan tumah, and if the whole thing is, if even achilas pras is dirabanan, they're not going to be metama this porridge because midrabanan, if you ate it, you'd get malchus. So you're saying achilas pras is da'iraisa? So right away, Tosfos asks, what do you mean achilas pras da'iraisa? Of course, achilas pras is da'iraisa. We know that you have to eat matzah. You have to eat. There's for sure a rule of achilas pras. So if we look down at Tosfos in the skinny lines, kuchazayis achilas da'iraisi, Omar Ram, the avagav the masnisani bekrisos. We are, of course, achilas pras is da'iraisa. How is the Gemara even pondering that? It says kol oichlim mitzdarfen b'chtei achilas pras. Zok Tosfos, that's true. That we know is da'iraisa. Hani mili livso. Design changes it. Isser probably. Hanamidi la'oichol chaylev shubeinei. There's a halacha that you're not allowed to eat chaylev, and the shear is going to be a kazayis. So if you have a piece of chaylev that's be'en and you eat a kazayis, achilas pras, you've done a violation. That for sure we say achilas pras is da'iraisa. But we're discussing a mixture. Avol shebit harubois hoyel ve'ein hetem mitzdarf l'isser yisbato. Who said that you say b'chtei achilas pras there? Maybe b'chtei achilas pras is if you have a piece of chaylev and you're eating it, you violate the kazayis. If you ate the kazayis in that period of time, it's called an achila. But in a mixture situation, if you hold ein heter b'tarf l'isser, maybe there's no such thing as a halacha of kedei achilas pras. If kedei achilas pras, you ate a mixture, and in that mixture there was a kazayis of content, that you don't know that it's da'iraisa. So that is the shaila of the Gemara. The gamim hayu malakita isu mitoicha heter v'achal be'enei b'chtei achilas pras loy mechayev al l'chudei. Here, with our discussion, since it's a mixture, even if you picked out those pieces where you know there's truma there, that also wouldn't be a problem if you hold in heter mistar for isser, because there's no isser here. So therefore, the Gemara is asking: is achilas pras da'iraisa even in the case of a mixture? He says, of course. Frag to Gemara, if in fact achilas pras is da'iraisa, even in the case of a mixture, well then amai polag rabbanon aleid Rabbi Eliezer bekuda chabavli. Kuda chabavli is some type of a dip that has vinegar and milk, but it also has chametz in it. And at this point, Tosfos tells us that we're assuming that there's enough chametz content in kuda chabavli to have a kazayis toich kedei achilas pras. There's enough of a concentration in there that b'chtei achilas pras, if you would eat kuta chabavli, you would end up eating a kazayis of chametz. So Zok the Gemara, why do the Rabbanan argue on the kuta chabavli and say that there's no problem there? If there's a kazayis b'chtei achilas pras, it should definitely be a problem. Because remember, the Rabbanan argue under Eliezer, and they hold ein heter mitzdarf l'isser, right? That's clear. They hold ein heter mistaref l'isser. Yet they don't argue by kutach. It must be because of the kazayis kedei achilas pras. So it must be. So if you hold achilas pras, if you hold it easy, okay, my pligi rabbana l'drabelaz v'kutach hababli, they would have to be moida that it would be osir because it's kazayis achilas pras, and you're saying kazayis achilas pras works to asr even if you don't hold heter mistaref l'isser. Amalei. Don't bring me a raya from Kutach Hababli. Hanach Kutach Hababli, the leka kazayis b'chtei achilas pras. In fact, if you eat Kutach Hababli for 3 minutes or for 9 minutes, you're not going to ingest a kazayis of isser. So therefore, there's no raya from there. And the Gemara gets into the practicality of it. Either kasarif law, misraf, if you gulp it down, Kutach is primarily like a dip. It's like ketchup. If you're gonna gulp it down, that's not called derech achila. You wouldn't get malchus for that. Gulping down ketchup is not called an achila. It's something that you dip into. And the mishter kashatar, and if you're just going to dip, lo mishkachas kazayis b'chtei achilas pras. If you eat kutach the way it's normally eaten, you'll never eat a kazayis b'chtei achilas pras. And that's why he argues from the kutach itself, not from the kutach itself, from the chametz content of the kutach itself.
Not
The matzah. Euch gebracht. Well, very good, very good. You're asking good questions. Let's see the Gemara weiter. Eisvei, shtei meduchas. There were two mortars. What a mortar is there's a mortar and a pestle. It's a pestle. The mortar is the little baseball bat that you crush the spices in, and the pestle is the keli that it's in. So you have two pestles with spices in them. Achas shel truma, one had truma spices. The achas shel chulin, and one had chulin spices. Well, the fun of shtei kederes, and then you had two pots of, let's say, porridge cooking. Achas shel truma of achas shel chulin. V'naflu elu l'soich elu. One pestle unloaded its contents into one pot and one into the other pot. So the law is shtein mutaris. Both pots are mutar. Shani oimer chulin l'soich chulin naflu, truma l'soich truma naflu. Now this has to be a suffix derabanan, because if it was a suffix deraisa, if it was a suffix of an issue deraisa, you cannot bet such odds. You have to be machmer that maybe the chulin fell into the truma, and the truma fell into the chulin. If you hold that kazayis b'chtei achilas pras is deraisa, amay amrin shani oimer. How could you say shani oimer? Fakert. What's going to happen is the chulin is going to be mitzaref to the truma. So oivazoi, if you hold that when you have a mixture and you eat b'soich chedei achilas pras, the kazayis of the isser content, that's also midaraisa, then how could this possibly be allowed? There's a suffix deraisa. Elamai. So Rabbi Bo answers back. So what are you going to say? Heter mitzaref le'isser? You're going to say heter is mitzaref le'isser? Fakir. So this is Rabbi Bo. Rabbi Bo said that heter is not mitzaref le'isser. So Rabbi Bo answered, Elamai heter mitzaref le'isser. So you want to prove from here that heter mitzaref le'isser? Then you have a bigger problem. Then Abai Amar Shani Omer. Then you have a bigger problem. If heter is mitzaref le'isser, you also have a problem. So at the end of the day, how could you possibly understand that this mixture, there's a possibility that you have truma mixed into chulin and vice versa? How could you say this is mutter? How could you be mekel? Which is what Chaim said. When you're talking about tavlin, when you're talking about spices, everybody agrees that such truma is only midrabanan. There happens to be a massive machlokes rishonim. Most rishonim learn that the only truma deraisa is on dagon, tirosh, and yitzar. Most rishonim hold that truma deraisa is only on grains, on wine, and on oil. But on all the pairs, there's no such chiyuv shmita. It's only the Rambam who holds that any oichel that's gidulim in the aretz will also have a chiyuv shmita. So that truma. So that we have the chiyuv truma is only according to the Rambam. And then there are shittas, there's a lot of shittas on the spectrum. Then there's the shita of the Ravid who holds maybe only Ma'aser Sheni applies to other things, but there's a lot of shittas. But the main two shittas are the Rishonim who hold that it only applies to Dagon, Tirosh, and Yitzar, and the Rambam that it applies to all pairs. But spices, vegetables, everybody agrees that Truma Deraisa doesn't apply to. So since this is a case of Truma Derabanan, and it's a subject Derabanan, you can go to Kula. Eisei Frek Gemara. It's a little bit complex. We'll go through it after. Tosfos has a lot of tight on it. Because then the Shala, how is there welcome to say that only this area is Tamei? Why? If it's true, it's all Tamei. Not a no. So it has to be the Rabbanim, right? It says it's Tamei ala Makam Agoy. There's no such thing as a Makam Agoy. It's either all or nothing. So it's all based on the Rabbanim. So we'll go back to that. I just want to finish that. I don't want to complicate it. Eisvei, shtei kupos. Achas shal truma v'achas shal chulin. You had two boxes. One had truma in it, one had chulin in it. Ulufneim shtei soyin, and you had in front of it two soyin. Achas shal chulin v'achas shal truma. V'naflu edel toichelu. These fell to those shnei mutar. Why? Shani oimer chulin l'sech chulin naflu and truma l'sech truma naflu. Here you can't say hanach la truma l's tavlin derabanan. Here we're talking about all grain. So we're talking about all deraises. So how can you explain this? How can you say that? Bishlam, according to me, Bishlam, according to me, who it's based on heter mitzvah iser, but we don't hold kazayis b'chtei prasus deraisa. I can say it's speaking kegoyin than a fishy chulin. I can say that there's more chulin, so therefore midaraisa is bottle, so it's only midarabon. Ela didach the armit mishum dika kazayis b'chtei pras kina fishy chulin might have it. What does it help if there's more chulin there? You're still going to end up eating truma b'chtei pras. Amalei. Hanach letruma bisman hazeh derabanan. That price is also speaking about truma derabanan, not because it's tavlin, because it's bisman hazeh. Okay, let's stop here. And we have 3 extra minutes, 2.5 extra minutes. So I want to do the toisvis that gets into what Chaim was referring to. Whoever wants to go, we're done the daf. But now I want to do some extra credits. The havinamba. Moka magoy amai posol haloi have a kabetza. So again, we're learning like Toisvis, who says that in order to become Tomei, Tumas Oichlin, it has to be the shear of a kabetza. I'm on Lamed Vav Amar Aleph, the third Toisvis up. V'havinam ba moka magoy amai posol haloi have a kabetza. Uveini Rashi lo yoshra zois girsa. Of course, according to Rashi, this girsa will not work. Notice the girsa that's in our printed Gemara doesn't say lo have a kabetza. It just says makam agoya my apostle. Toisvus is giris lo have a kabetza because Toisvus is basing the kash on the fact that the stuff is be'en and it shouldn't become tamei because it's not a shir kabetza. Shebekama makoim is pirish. Rashi learns in many places sha'oichel makabel tuma afilu b'cholshu. Rashi argues on Toisvus all over Shas and says to contract tumas oichlin. Even a mashu will contract tumas oichlin. Kididashina b'teres kahanim oichel yitma malamet shemitama b'kolshu. He learns in teres kahanim a drasha that it's mitama b'kolshu. Yochel af lacherim b'kolshu. You might think that it could be mitama other things. It can transit tuma even though it's only a kolshu. Tamad loimer asher yochel oichel hanechel b'vasachas feinu kabei. The only thing that could transmit tuma is a kabetza. But Tosfos argues that's machta ba'almahi. It's not really a limud, and therefore, it could only. He argues and holds that even contracting tuma of tuma soichlin has to be a shear, and he brings a raya from Maseches Oilos, which I want to skip. Zokt Tosfos, like what Chaim said, v'ad dayik v'alo have a kabeta tzarich loimer the lava shem and dayik. Exactly what Chaim said. The Gemara is not asking from the oil that's mixed in. The mashkin mitamin the pachas miravias. The mashkin would become tama even if it's pachas miravias. So the kasha, if the tuma touched the oil, avada would become tama. El shum parach, the whole kasha is only on the shum. Why it's not tama? Vim taimar umay parach, if shum b'shemen emesu she'ein mekabel tuma pachas mikibeya midaraisa. Even though midaraisa they're not makabel tuma, mikomak and pasli shapir, they should still be puzzle. I guess midarabanan. The afal gav, even though, let me just see the samach here. The afal gav, the ein makabel tuma midaraisa. Even though midaraisa, these things would not be makabel tuma, mikomak and midarabanan matami, they're still tama midarabanan. Umay parach, and therefore, what's the kasha? Midarabanan tami. Zaktois v'shema. Ha the pasal, mashma midaraisa. Somehow the Gemara assumes that when the Brisa says that it pasals the makamagoy, that's a deraisa, and that's why the Gemara is asking the kasha, because avada midarbanon it would be pasal anyway. Okay, gewaltig. Umeshani hoyel the zor loikal of the kazayis. But lavdavkin nokat loike the truma shumas midrabanan. You're not really like it. Alahachi kamer hoyel v'zor loika love because ilo haisa truma dairaisa dinu lachshiva v'lois battle agavamitva. Once you hold that you consider eating a straight kazais in a mixture, so then we consider it one unit. If it's one unit, lagabe being over and Isra Achila, it's also one unit, lagabe being tummy. Gavaltic. I also just want to look at, if you look over here, let's look, oh, you can see where I'm pointing to. Hoyel Bazar Lekal of Kazais. Mishum the same Trumala. Hilchel Gabe Tumanami Shem Trumala. Umil Lechamir Katruma Atzma, not mamish like Truma, we fossil kulam. Lashon Rashi B'Psachim, right? Because it's only Makamagoy. We don't consider the whole thing tummy. The Kashal raised up. To be the park will lift up Baruba. So according to Rashi, according to this already extra credit, you know, according to Rashi, he learns that it will become tummy with a mashu. So if that's the case, what's the kasha over here that shouldn't become tummy? So Rashi must learn that they're completely dissolved. And his kasha is the liftil baruba, these things, according to Tosfos, can't be bottled because it's be'en. According to Rashi, it's speaking where the oil and the shum were minced and they were mixed in. And the question is, it should be bottled baroid because it's not ben, because anything that's ben cannot be bottled baroid. So the Kashla Re'atam on Rashi, the Midah Parch V'liftel Baruba, since the Gemara's kasha, according to Rashi, is V'liftel Baruba, Mashmash Hashum B'Hashem Ein Ben. According to the Rashi learns, it's speaking where it was not ben. The Davar Sheba'en Ein is bottled, because if it was ben, it wouldn't be bottled. V'lei Mashma Hachi, but it's not mashma like that from the Brisa, the Katani V'Nagat Tful Yoim B'Miktzosoi. What do you mean Miktzosoi? It says B'Miktzosoi, what is the Chesed? This is very important, because it's with the Yaktaloshim. Am I looking at the hay? The mikvah mashma dashum v'Hashem koyveloy mikveh, because midolay time b'miktsasa. Mikveh is loshen akeva. So if it touched part of the mikveh, it should be miktsasa. The fact that it be miktsasa means it's got to be referring to the shum and the shemen. But how is it possible that the tumah touch that if they're mixed in and you don't see them and they're not ba'en? So that's why this is one of the rights that Tosfos has, that the shum and the oil must be ba'en. From the Lashon Abraisa, that the Tumah actually touched the shum must be ben. Otherwise, how could it touch it? So that's one of Tosfos' kasha. The Sud, the Sefer Dachmishra, B'Sech Tzful Amar Yehuda, a Mosai Bizman Shem Gush B'Kaira. Once again, Mash with the Irish Shu B'en. V'Oid Kasha L'Riba, Gush is it's not dissolved. It's a non-hosam. Correct. The oil, of course, is not Gush. If it's the mu'amur, which is exactly this case, according to Rashi, it's not be'en. How could you make that distinction? Either you hold like Rabbi Yosy and Rabbi Shimon, who holds the whole thing is nefselas, or you hold like the first Tana that it's not possible at all. How could you separate it? And he goes and says that it's be'en, and that's how I learned. But according to Rashi, you're going to have to say that it was mixed, it was all mixed in, and the kash is it should be batal baroy. So if it's batal baroy, why is even a little bit us? Right? So according to Rashi, you're going to have to say it's derabanan. Right? You're going to have to say derabanan because shum is derabanan anyway. So this is all a shaila of derabanan anyway. But I couldn't say this in the regular share because it would get too confusing. I'm trying to keep it simple.